Arizona Territory, 1875. The merciless summer storm had transformed the desert into a raging torrent, beating against the earth with such fury that even the most experienced travelers knew to seek shelter. Lightning split the sky in jagged bolts, illuminating the rugged landscape in brief, harsh flashes. Through sheets of relentless rain, Istaqa tracked his way back to the Apache camp, his senses alert despite the howling wind. At 25, Istaqa had already earned respect among his people as a skilled hunter and warrior of the Chiricahua band. The son of a respected medicine man, he carried himself with quiet dignity, his lean, muscular frame moving with the natural grace of one who had learned to read the desert since childhood. His handsome features, high cheekbones, strong jaw lightly shadowed with stubble, and penetrating dark eyes, were set in concentration as he navigated the treacherous terrain. Istaqa believed that the white settlers' encroachment meant only one thing: eventual destruction for his people. This conviction hardened his heart against any possibility of peace between their worlds. The white man brings only death and broken promises. His father had warned him since childhood, and Istaqa had seen enough evidence to believe it absolutely. His personal creed had become simple: protect his people, trust no outsider, and expect betrayal from anyone with pale skin. This was the only way to survive. As he rounded a bend in the narrow canyon, a flash of lightning revealed something unnatural against the rocky ground ahead, something that didn't belong. Approaching cautiously, bow half drawn, Istaqa discovered the crumpled form of a young woman. Her golden blonde hair, now matted with mud, spilled around her pale face. Her blue calico dress, once fine but now torn and soaked, clung to her slender frame. Kneeling beside her, Istaqa pressed his fingers to her neck, finding a faint pulse. She was alive, but barely. A deep gash on her forehead suggested she had fallen, perhaps thrown from a horse or wagon. She couldn't have been more than 20 summers old. His first instinct was to leave her. She was not his concern. She was one of them, the invaders. Her people would likely blame her death on savage Indians regardless. Yet something stopped him. Perhaps the memory of his mother's teachings about honoring all life. Perhaps the realization that this helpless woman had done him no personal wrong. This changes nothing, Istaqa muttered to himself in his native tongue as he carefully gathered her in his arms. I save one life today. Tomorrow, her people still come for our land. The nearest white settlement was a day's journey away, and in this storm, she would not survive the night without shelter. With resignation, Istaqa made his decision. He would take her to the small cave he sometimes used when hunting, away from his people's camp, but close enough to reach by nightfall. Lilah Edwards regained consciousness to the sound of crackling fire and the unfamiliar smell of burning sage. Pain throbbed through her head as she struggled to open her eyes, disoriented and frightened. When her vision finally cleared, she found herself lying on a bed of soft furs inside a small cave. Across from her, tending a modest fire, sat a Native American man. Terror shot through her as 19-year-old Lilah tried to scramble backward, only to collapse with dizziness. The story she'd heard since arriving in the Arizona Territory 3 months ago, tales of savage Apache raids and captured white women, flooded her mind. Be still, the man said in surprisingly clear English. Your head is wounded. Who are you? Lilah managed, her voice hoarse. What happened to my father's wagon? I am Istaqa of the Chiricahua Apache. He replied without looking directly at her. I found you alone in the canyon during the storm. There was no wagon. Memories began returning in fragments. The sudden storm. Her father deciding to push ahead to reach Tucson rather than make camp. The horses spooked by lightning. The wagon while catching on a rock, and then, nothing. My father, she whispered. He must be looking for me. The storm continues. No one searches in such weather. Istaqa handed her a small clay cup. Drink. It will help the pain. Lilah hesitated, her pale blue eyes wide with apprehension. If I wanted to harm you, Istaqa said with a hint of bitterness, I would have left you to die in the storm. His logic was undeniable. With trembling hands, she accepted the cup and sipped the bitter herbal tea. Her long blonde hair fell in tangled waves around her heart-shaped face, still beautiful despite the dirt and dried blood that streaked her fair skin. Thank you, she said quietly, for saving my life. Istaqa merely nodded, his expression unreadable. "Sleep. Tomorrow I will take you to your people." As Lilah drifted back into uneasy sleep, Istaqa studied her in the firelight. She was unlike the few white women he had observed from a distance. There was a softness to her features that spoke of kindness, and even in her fear, she had shown courage. Still, he reminded himself, one gentle-faced woman did not change what her kind represented. When morning came, he would return her to her people and be done with this strange interruption to his life. The storm raged for 3 days. Istaqa had intended to guide Lilah to the settlement as soon as the weather cleared, but the relentless downpour had swollen the streams into raging rivers, making travel impossible. Each day, he hunted what little game ventured out in the rain and gathered edible plants, returning to find Lilah growing stronger. Despite his resolve to maintain distance, conversation slowly developed between them. Lilah spoke of her journey west from Pennsylvania after her mother's death, traveling with her father to start a new life. Istaqa shared nothing of himself at first, but Lilah's genuine interest and respectful questions eventually wore down his silence. On the third evening, as they shared a meal of rabbit stew, Lilah asked, "Why did you help me? You could have left me there." Istaqa considered her question for a long moment. "My mother taught that all life deserves respect, even when it comes in forms we do not understand." "Your mother sounds wise," Lilah replied softly. "She was. The soldiers killed her 5 winters ago." The words came out before he could stop them. Lilah's eyes filled with tears. "I am so sorry." "Your sorrow changes nothing," he said sharply, then immediately regretted his harshness when he saw her flinch. "But I accept your words as genuine." Later that night, as Lilah slept, Istaqa sat at the cave entrance, troubled by the confusion growing within him. This woman's presence was challenging beliefs he had held as absolute truth. She showed none of the contempt or fear he expected from white settlers. Instead, she listened earnestly when he reluctantly spoke of his people's ways, asked thoughtful questions, and showed gratitude for his care. Most disturbing of all, he found himself looking forward to their conversations. On the 4th morning, the storm finally broke. Sunlight streamed into the cave entrance, and both knew their strange time together was ending. "I will take you to the trading post at Eagle Creek," Istaqa said as he gathered his few possessions. "Your people will be there searching." "Yes," Lilah agreed, though her voice lacked conviction. During their days together, she had come to see beyond the frightening stories she'd heard. Istaqa had been unfailingly respectful, keeping a proper distance, providing for her needs, and treating her injuries with surprising gentleness. He was nothing like the savage Apache described in hushed whispers around settler campfires. The journey to Eagle Creek would take most of the day. They traveled in companionable silence, Istaqa occasionally pointing out medicinal plants or signs of wildlife. As they walked, Lilah felt a growing sense of dread at the thought of returning to the settlement, not because she didn't wish to find her father, but because it meant saying goodbye to the enigmatic man who had saved her life. When they crested a hill overlooking Eagle Creek in the late afternoon, the sight below stopped them both. A group of cavalry soldiers milled about the small collection of buildings, and a wagon train had circled nearby. "Your people," Istaqa said flatly, his face once again becoming the emotionless mask she had first seen. "Wait," Lilah said, touching his arm lightly. "I want to thank you properly. What you did. No thanks are needed between us." His voice was distant now. "This is where our paths separate. Will I see you again?" The question escaped before she could consider its impropriety. A muscle tightened in Istaqa's jaw. "It would be best for both if we did not." He turned to leave, but Lilah's voice stopped him. "My father is a doctor. He doesn't share the common prejudices. If you ever need help." Istaqa looked back at her one last time, a complex emotion flickering across his face. "Farewell, Lilah Edwards." And then he was gone, disappearing into the brush as silently as he had entered her life. 2 weeks passed. Lilah had been reunited with her distraught father, Dr. William Edwards, who had indeed been searching desperately for his daughter. The soldiers had insisted the Apache were responsible for her disappearance, and only her firm denials and detailed account of Istaqa's kindness had prevented a retaliatory raid on nearby Apache camps. Dr. Edwards had established his medical practice in the growing settlement of Tucson, where he and Lilah now lived in a modest house on the town's edge. Unlike many settlers, Dr. Edwards believed in treating all people with equal care, often providing medical services to Mexicans, Chinese workers, and occasionally even Native Americans who dared approach his door. Lilah had thrown herself into assisting her father's practice, having been trained in basic nursing since childhood. Yet thoughts of Istaqa persistently interrupted her concentration. She found herself scanning the horizon whenever she ventured outside town, wondering where he might be, if he was safe, if he ever thought of her. On a sweltering June evening, as Lilah was closing her father's surgery for the night, a soft tap came at the back door. Opening it cautiously, she gasped at the sight of Istaqa standing in the shadows, his normally proud stance weakened by obvious pain. Blood seeped through a crude bandage wrapped around his upper arm. "You said if I needed help," he said simply, his dark eyes meeting hers. "Come in quickly," Lilah whispered, glancing nervously at the street before ushering him inside. "My father is having dinner with the mayor." "What happened?" "Bullet. White hunters claimed I was stealing their horses." Istaqa's voice was strained. "I was tracking deer that crossed their camp." Lilah guided him to the examination table and carefully unwrapped the blood-soaked cloth. The wound was ugly but clean. The bullet had passed through muscle without hitting bone. "I can treat this," she said with professional calm that belied her racing heart. "But you'll need to rest afterward. It's not safe for you here." As she cleaned and stitched the wound, their proximity stirred emotions both had tried to suppress. Istaqa watched her delicate fingers work with practiced efficiency, her brow furrowed in concentration, her blonde hair glowing in the lamplight. When her hand accidentally brushed against his chest, she blushed, and he found himself entranced by the color that spread across her cheeks. "Why did you really come here?" Lilah asked softly as she finished bandaging his arm. "There are healers among your people." Istaqa was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I needed to see that you were safe." The simple admission hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Lilah's hand trembled slightly as she packed away her father's medical supplies. "You should go before my father returns," she said reluctantly. "Yes." But Istaqa made no move to leave. Instead, he reached out with his uninjured arm and gently touched a loose strand of her hair. "Your kindness is rare, Lilah Edwards. I will not forget it." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps sent him slipping out the back door and into the night, leaving Lilah breathless and confused. Whatever had begun in that cave during the storm had not ended. It was growing into something neither had anticipated or sought. Over the following months, Istaqa returned several times under cover of darkness. Each visit was brief but meaningful. Sometimes he brought rare medicinal plants for Dr. Edwards' practice, which Lilah claimed to have found herself. Sometimes merely to exchange news. Dr. Edwards, perceptive but discreet, eventually deduced the truth of these visits but said nothing, recognizing the impossible situation developing under his roof. During this time, Lilah declined 2 marriage proposals from respectable settlers, unable to explain even to herself why she found these suitable matches so unappealing. Her father worried privately that his daughter's heart was engaged in a direction that could only bring her pain in their current world. In late October, everything changed. A new cavalry commander arrived in Tucson, Colonel James Barrett, known for his brutal campaigns against the Apache. Within days of his arrival, rumors spread that he had ordered the destruction of several Apache camps, regardless of whether they had been involved in recent raids. When Istaqa failed to appear for what had become their regular monthly meeting, fear clutched at Lilah's heart. Unable to bear the uncertainty, she convinced one of her father's Mexican patients, Manuel Ortiz, to guide her to where the Apache bands were known to camp for autumn hunting. "This is madness, Miss Edwards," Manuel protested as they rode out before dawn. "If the soldiers catch us, they will assume we are sympathizers. If the Apache find us first, I trust Istaqa's people will not harm us if we come peacefully," Lilah insisted, though her courage wavered with each mile they traveled into the rugged mountains. They had ridden for most of the day when the distant sound of gunfire echoed through the canyons. Manuel immediately pulled his horse to a stop. "Soldiers," he whispered, "we must turn back." "No," Lilah urged her horse forward. "We must see what's happening." Reluctantly, Manuel followed as they picked their way toward a ridge overlooking a small valley. What they saw below froze the blood in Lilah's veins. Cavalry soldiers were systematically burning an Apache camp, shooting at fleeing figures. Bodies lay scattered among the burning wickiups. "Oh God," Lilah whispered, tears streaming down her face. Suddenly, movement caught her eye. A small group of Apache warriors was fighting back from the cover of rocks, allowing women and children to escape into the hills. Among them, she recognized Istaqa's tall figure, his rifle flashing as he provided covering fire. Without thinking, Lilah urged her horse down the slope, ignoring Manuel's desperate calls. She had nearly reached the valley floor when a stray bullet struck her horse, sending the animal crashing to the ground. Lilah was thrown clear but lay stunned, the breath knocked from her lungs. The battle swirled around her as she struggled to regain her senses. Then strong hands were lifting her, and she looked up into Istaqa's dirt-streaked face. "What madness brought you here?" he demanded, pulling her behind the shelter of a boulder as bullets whined past. "I feared for you," she gasped. "When you didn't come, an explosion rocked the ground as a soldier's grenade detonated nearby." Istaqa shielded Lilah with his body, then made a quick decision. "Follow me. Stay low." Together they crawled through the underbrush toward a narrow ravine, bullets kicking up dirt around them. Once in the relative safety of the deep gully, they ran, bent double, until the sounds of battle began to fade. Only then did Istaqa pull Lilah into a small cave hidden behind a stand of juniper trees. Inside, an elderly Apache woman was tending to several injured people, including children. She looked up sharply when Istaqa entered with Lilah, her weathered face showing clear disapproval. "Grandmother, she is a friend," Istaqa explained in Apache, then switched to English. "This is Nehemina, my father's sister. She knows some healing ways." Lilah immediately moved to help the injured, her nursing skills transcending the language barrier. As she worked alongside Nehemina, the old woman's initial hostility gradually transformed into reluctant acceptance. Night fell, and the small group of survivors huddled in the cave, waiting to see if it was safe to move. Istaqa returned from scouting with grim news. "The soldiers camp in the valley. They will search the hills at dawn." His eyes met Lilah's. "You cannot stay with us. If they find you among Apache, they will kill you as a traitor." "I won't leave these people," Lilah said firmly, cradling a sleeping Apache child whose mother had been killed in the attack. "I won't leave you." In the dim firelight, something shifted in Istaqa's expression, a wall crumbling, a truth finally acknowledged. He crossed to where she sat and knelt beside her. "I have fought this feeling since I found you in the storm," he said quietly. "I told myself it was impossible, that our worlds would never allow it. But today, seeing you risk your life coming here," he touched her cheek with calloused fingers. "My heart knows what my mind refused to accept." Lilah leaned into his touch, her own carefully guarded feelings finally breaking free. "I've thought of you every day. I know it seems impossible, but, shoo." Istaqa pressed his forehead to hers in an intimate Apache gesture. "Tonight, we face what is real between us. Tomorrow, we face the world." In that moment, surrounded by tragedy, yet finding unexpected connection, they acknowledged the depth of feelings that had grown against all odds and reason. With the old woman watching as silent witness, they spoke softly through the night, planning, dreaming, and finally accepting that their paths had become inexorably entwined. Dawn brought new dangers. The soldiers were indeed moving through the hills, methodically searching each ravine and cave. Istaqa made a desperate decision. "Nehemina will guide the others to the high country camps," he told Lilah. "You and I must reach the Mexican border. I have friends among the Yaqui who will shelter us." "My father," Lilah began, torn by the thought of leaving without a word. "We will send word once we are safe," Istaqa promised. "Dr. Edwards is a good man. He will understand." The journey south was perilous. Twice they narrowly avoided cavalry patrols, and once they were forced to hide for an entire day in a dry creek bed as soldiers passed overhead. Lilah's pale skin and blonde hair made concealment difficult, but Istaqa's lifetime of desert knowledge kept them moving steadily toward the border. On their fourth night, they made camp in a sheltered canyon. As they sat beside a tiny, carefully shielded fire, Istaqa shared a devastating truth. "The attack was not random," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Colonel Barrett came for my father specifically. A white trader told him that Nakohigashivan was organizing resistance among the bands. Was he? Lilah asked gently. Yes. My father believed we must unite or perish. Istaqa stared into the flames. Now he is dead, along with many others. I was to carry on his work, to bring the scattered bands together. And now? Istaqa looked at her, conflict evident in his expression. Now I wonder if there is another way, one that does not end in more death. Lilah took his hand in hers. Your father wanted his people to survive. Perhaps survival can take different forms than he imagined. As they continued south, a transformation was occurring in Istaqa. The certainty that had hardened his heart, that conflict between their peoples was inevitable and eternal, began to crack in the face of Lilah's unwavering belief that compassion could bridge even the widest divides. My father was a spiritual leader who taught that all beings are connected, Istaqa told her one evening. Yet I closed myself to that teaching when it came to your people. I saw only enemies. And I was raised with stories that made your people seem inhuman, Lilah admitted. We were both blinded by what we were taught to believe. Their journey brought them to the border, where they found shelter with a mixed community of Yaqui and Mexican families who lived beyond the reach of American authority. There, they were married in a ceremony that blended Apache, Yaqui, and Christian traditions, with Lilah wearing a wedding dress sewn by the village women and Istaqa in traditional Apache ceremonial attire. For 6 months, they lived in relative peace, building a small home and working alongside their new community. Lilah used her medical knowledge to help the village, while Istaqa taught hunting and tracking skills to the young men. They sent word to Dr. Edwards through trusted traders, and he responded with medical supplies, books, and his blessing. Yet the world beyond their sanctuary continued to change. The Apache wars were intensifying, with Geronimo and other leaders fighting desperately against overwhelming odds. News reached them that many Apache were being forced onto reservations, their traditional ways of life systematically destroyed. One evening, as they sat outside their home watching the sunset, Istaqa made a decision that had been forming for months. We must go back, he said simply. Lilah, now visibly pregnant with their first child, understood immediately. To help your people? To help all people. Istaqa placed his hand gently on her rounded belly. Our child will be of both worlds. I want to build a place where that is strength, not weakness. Dr. Edwards had written of growing support among certain politicians and religious leaders for peaceful coexistence and fair treatment of native peoples. He had connections with Quaker missionaries who were advocating for Apache rights and better conditions on reservations. With cautious hope, Istaqa and Lilah traveled north again, this time to New Mexico territory where Dr. Edwards had relocated his practice to a settlement near the Mescalero Apache reservation. Their reunion was tearful and joyous, with the elderly doctor embracing both his daughter and his Apache son-in-law without reservation. I've purchased land, Dr. Edwards told them. 200 acres along the river, with water rights. Good farmland, but also with access to hunting grounds. The deed is in both your names. Istaqa was stunned by this gesture. Why would you do this? Because my daughter loves you, the doctor said simply. And because I believe in what you two represent, the possibility of a different future. In the spring of 1877, as new life burst forth across the land, Lilah gave birth to a son they named William Nakohigashivan Edwards. The child had his mother's blue eyes set in a face that clearly showed his mixed heritage, living proof that worlds could merge. On their land, Istaqa and Lilah created something unprecedented, a place where Apache traditions were honored alongside modern medicine and agriculture. Gradually, others joined them. First came several of Istaqa's relatives who had survived the massacres, then mixed-race families seeking acceptance, and eventually even a few progressive white settlers drawn by Dr. Edwards' reputation. Their community became known as Harmony Creek, neither a reservation nor a typical settlement, but something new. Istaqa worked tirelessly with Apache leaders on nearby reservations, advocating for better conditions while also preserving traditional knowledge. Lilah established a small clinic where she practiced both Western medicine and the herbal remedies she had learned from Nehemana. It was not an easy path. They faced prejudice from both sides. White settlers who considered Lilah a race traitor, and traditional Apache who viewed Istaqa's choices with suspicion. Yet as years passed, their unwavering commitment to each other and to their vision began to bear fruit. By 1885, their family had grown to include 3 children, their farm prospered, and Harmony Creek had become a model that attracted visitors from as far away as Washington, D.C. Photographers and journalists came to document this unusual community where Apache, white, and Mexican children played together, where traditional ceremonies were performed alongside Christian services, and where the ancient wisdom of the desert was preserved even as new agricultural techniques were adopted. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Istaqa took Lilah back to the cave where he had first brought her during the storm. They made the journey alone, leaving their children in Dr. Edwards' care for a few days. As they sat at the cave entrance watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson, Istaqa took Lilah's hand, now weathered by years of hard work, but still delicate in his. "Do you remember what I believed when I found you?" he asked. "That our peoples could never find peace. That trust between us was impossible." Lilah leaned against his shoulder, comfortable in the love they had built across boundaries of culture and prejudice. "I was so certain," Istaqa mused. "So close to possibility. We both were, in different ways." Istaqa gazed out at the landscape he had once roamed as a warrior filled with bitterness. "The world is still changing, not always for the better. Many of my people suffer on the reservations. Many of your people still carry hate in their hearts. But we've shown another way is possible," Lilah said firmly. "Our children will carry that forward." As the first stars appeared in the deepening blue sky, Istaqa pulled Lilah into his embrace. "When I found you in that storm, I thought I was merely saving one life. I did not know I was saving my own. Perhaps we saved each other," Lilah whispered against his chest. In the growing darkness, they reaffirmed the love that had transformed not only their lives, but the lives of all those their unusual union had touched. The false beliefs that had once defined them had given way to a deeper truth, that even in the harshest landscape, with the weight of history and prejudice against them, love could take root and flourish, creating something new and strong and enduring. And as they made their way back to Harmony Creek the next day, to their children and the community they had built together, both knew with absolute certainty that the storm that had once thrown them together had indeed changed their destinies in ways neither could have imagined, and in doing so, had begun to change the destiny of the frontier itself.